Great to have you with us, Professor Dershowitz.
Well, thank you. This was a self-inflicted wound of judicial activism. I think people don't realize the Supreme Court didn't have to overrule Roe versus Wade to decide the case before it. The case before it was a Mississippi statute which says no abortions after 15 weeks. The court could simply have said, we hold this statute constitutional, no abortions after 15 weeks, and no overruling of Roe versus Wade. This is extreme judicial activism. Now, obviously, the court would have overruled Roe versus Wade in the proper case, maybe a year or 2 or 3 from now. But to rush to overrule a 50-year-old precedent in a case where the issue wasn't presented is just to provoke division. And it's going to do that. It's going to provoke division. In the end, it will help the Democratic Party at the polls. And in the end, probably we'll see future challenges. We'll probably see an effort by the Democrat-controlled House and Senate.
Before we get there, Professor Dershowitz, before we jump ahead to that part of this, because we do see the activism, and we know this will definitely galvanize voters. But I wanted to drill down a little bit on the ruling. You mentioned what this opinion actually does. Not only does it uphold the Mississippi abortion law, but it also uproots Roe v. Wade and Casey, these cases here. Talk to us about this, because what we're seeing from the reporting is that Chief Justice John Roberts didn't want to necessarily do the latter. What he wanted to do was just uphold the Mississippi law here. Why do you think Justice Alito went this far with this opinion? And obviously you expect the conservative justice to join with him, but it seems like John Roberts almost capitulated to that he's not the leader of the court anymore, that it's the more conservative justices that are leading the court.
Shocked at that. I would have thought that Roberts would have not joined the opinion. It still would have been a majority, and written a separate opinion. Instead, he joined the opinion and concurred. And I think whether or not that was a function of the leak, I don't know. Probably not. But it was judicial activism. There's just absolutely no reason why the Supreme Court had to reach that issue today. They did not have to reach it. They would have to reach it eventually, but they reached out to the issue not necessarily before them.
Professor Dershowitz, they made a statement saying that they did not want their opinion to be mischaracterized or misunderstood. So within their framework, they were just relying on that to say this is not something for the Supreme Court to be handling. This is not in the Constitution. This needs to go back to the states. What do you make of the statement saying they don't want their ruling to be misunderstood or mischaracterized? Will that play?
No, it will be misunderstood, mischaracterized, and it will result in challenges to state laws all over the country. And it will result in demonstrations, which are perfectly constitutionally protected. And I hope it doesn't result in violence, which Jane's Revenge and other hard left radical feminist organizations have promised. This is a time for thoughtful and sober reflection and for attempts to try to give women their rights. Your previous speaker, the congressman from New Jersey, talked about this opinion protecting not only the rights of fetuses, which it does, but also the rights of their co-victims, the mothers. How dare he? Mothers are intelligent people. They have the right to make decisions. They may not have the right to kill a fetus. That's an issue up for dispute. I happen to think that within a few beginning of the pregnancy they do, but that's not the issue. The issue is don't say this protects the rights of women. Women are human beings with agency and autonomy, and he denies them the right to choose. Now, the right to choice is in conflict with the right of the fetus, but at least the woman's right, we know that has been taken away. And you can't try to soften this opinion by saying it also supports the rights of co-victims who are women.
Professor,
that's chutzpah extreme.
Well, Professor Dershowitz, you have a more liberal read on the Constitution than the justices and the six justices that ruled in favor or against, in this case, against abortion in this case. President Obama tweeted out that this ruling is an attack on the essential freedoms of millions of Americans. What freedoms specifically is he talking about? Because, again, in the ruling today, it takes issue with the Roe decision and the Casey decision, which are based on the 9th and the 14th Amendments. Where do these fundamental rights exist inside the Constitution?
Well, I think they exist in the Fourth Amendment, which guarantees the people the right to security over their persons, over their bodies. That includes the right of women to make choices. For example, if the court had said women cannot choose to have their appendix removed without their husband's approval. Obviously, that would be unconstitutional, even though there's no explicit mention of appendixes in the Constitution. Now, fetuses are not appendixes. They are real people. They are human beings. So it requires a balance. But to say that just because the word is not mentioned in the Constitution, that's absurd. Neither is birth control. Are we going to now attack birth control and say that married couples
I think that's what Bianca was talking about in that language that narrowly focused the ruling on this particular issue, abortion. You avoid those slippery slope arguments. And I got to give you credit, because when you talk about the rights of the mother, you have to balance out the rights of the unborn here, and that was always the issue. Abortion is no more illegal today than it was yesterday, right? In certain states like New York or California, where we can only expect that they will expand abortion access.
I think that's right. And the real victims here are women in states that will deny any right of abortion, and the beneficiaries are fetuses. And if you believe in a right to life, if you believe that a fetus at a certain time in the pregnancy deserves constitutional protection, then this is a victory for rights. But surely it shouldn't be applied to birth control. Nobody has the right to be conceived. And it certainly shouldn't apply to gay marriage, because there are no victims of gay marriage. It's nobody's business if a gay man marries another man. It's nobody's business if a black man marries a white woman. And yet all of those rights adhere from a right of privacy growing out of the Fourth Amendment, the Ninth Amendment, and the 10th Amendment. And that has been undercut. And so there's legitimate concern, even though the Supreme Court said it's limiting its decision to abortion, that some lower courts might expand it and apply to other fundamental basic rights of privacy, which Brandeis talked about as the most fundamental right of all, the right to be left alone by government to make your own decisions. Abortion is a hard case because it involves these other cases are not hard cases. It's nobody's business who marries whom.
So I think we've known, obviously, since that leaked draft, Professor Dershowitz, that this day was coming, and it would most likely go like this. So there's no surprise here. Obviously, as you mentioned, everyone's concerned about violence. I want to get your reaction to some of the reaction coming in. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, here's what she said a short time ago about the Supreme Court's decision, which will overturn Roe v. Wade.
It's such a contradiction. Yesterday, they say the states cannot make laws governing the constitutional right to bear arms. And today, they're saying the exact reverse, that the states can overturn a constitutional right for 50 years, a constitutional right for a woman having the right to choose. The hypocrisy is raging, but the harm is endless.
What do you make of that comment?
Well, it's an interesting one. There is something of an inconsistency of attitudes, giving the states so much power to regulate abortion and so little power to regulate guns. The opponents of that point of view say, look, guns are in the Constitution, abortion is not in the Constitution. But remember, the Second Amendment isn't so clear about the right to bear arms. It says basically the need for a well-regulated militia. And when the founding fathers wrote the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, militias were controlled by the states, and they well regulated the militias. They decided if young people could join the militias and have guns, if people with mental illness, if people with criminal records. And I think the states should continue to have more power than the Supreme Court gave them to regulate guns. After all, the issue is different in rural New Mexico than it is in the subways of New York. And the states should have somewhat more power. And the states do have power to regulate abortion. The question is, how much power? So both of these decisions are matters of degree, and Pelosi, as usual, overstated it, and the people on the other side overstated it. This is the time for compromise, for wise minds to settle on reasonable approaches that understand the right to life, that understand the right to choice, that understand the right to guns, that understand the right to be free from gun violence. This requires calibration and nuance, and that's one thing our country lacks today. We're so divided, so polarized, that we can't seem to think rationally about how to compromise and come to reasonable positions.
Professor Dershowitz, I would just push back a little bit on that last point. I don't disagree with you entirely because we see issues like this, the abortion issue, the gun control issue, very divisive. But we've seen a lot of rulings from the court recently in this session where they are more in agreement than they are in disagreement. Just yesterday, there was another ruling on voter ID out of North Carolina. It was 8-1. And, we see that a lot more. It just doesn't get as much coverage because these are obviously the highly charged political issues. And I think that speaks to what Nancy Pelosi was talking about as well. But I think the politicization outside the court is a lot greater than it is inside the court.
Look, I agree with you. When you get idiots like Keith Olbermann commenting, saying that we ought to abolish the Supreme Court. That's what Stalin tried to do with his courts. Right. Radicals on the hard left who are prepared to take extremist positions, even to packing the court as an extremist position. Because if you pack the court today and add 3 or 4 justices, then when the Republicans take control, they'll add 3 or 4 justices. And suddenly the Supreme Court will have to sit in Yankee Stadium in order to decide cases. There'll be so many justices. That's not the right approach. Abolishing the Supreme Court is the right approach. Let's talk about legislation that perhaps gives women the rights, and perhaps maybe a decision that says that a state can't prevent a woman traveling.
I think we'll have to agree to disagree right there, because as long as that's a state doing that, I think people would agree with you who watch this show. But if you're talking about federalizing it in any way, then I think we're getting to a much deeper debate we don't have time for right now, Professor Dershowitz.
I want to try both. I want states to do more, and I want the federal government to do more to protect the rights of women who want abortions and can't get it in their states. I think we can do both, and the political process will prevail. That's what I think is going to happen. I also think the Democrats are going to benefit in the midterm elections by this decision. I think a lot more on the fence will vote Democrat in order to give their children, their nieces, and their grandchildren the right to terminate a pregnancy in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, which 65% of Americans.
And a lot of people say that's the great thing about this about federalism is it puts the hands back in the voters. They can do more if they want to, if they vote that way. Great to see you. Professor Dershowitz, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.